What would you do if your HOA decided your backyard was an eyesore and bulldozed it without your permission? If you think that sounds absurd, trust me, I did too. Until it happened to me. My name is Ethan Whitmore, and until 6 months ago, I was living a peaceful, under-the-radar life in Oak Estates, a seemingly idyllic suburban neighborhood in western Massachusetts. I had no idea that moving into my modest colonial revival home would eventually lead to a battle over property rights, historical preservation, and one woman's relentless quest for control. 3 years ago, I purchased my home from Margaret "Maggie" Calloway, a kind-hearted elderly woman who had lived there for nearly 5 decades. She sold it to me at a fair price, saying she wanted someone who would appreciate its character. What she didn't explicitly mention, though it was in the property records if you knew where to look, was that my backyard contained the partially preserved foundation of a pre-Revolutionary War meeting house. Nothing extravagant, just some old stone remnants, partially covered by grass and soil, with a bronze commemorative plaque installed by the local historical society in 1972. Enter Victoria Holloway, or as she would soon become known around the neighborhood, and later in the news, Preservation Victoria. She moved into the large Tudor-style house across the street about 8 months after I settled in. By the end of her 3rd month, she had bulldozed her way onto the HOA board, fast-tracked herself to president, and begun her reign of preserving property values through vigilance. If only she had applied that same preservation mindset to actual historical artifacts instead of weaponizing HOA bylaws. My first interaction with her was fairly harmless. One morning, I found a 20-page HOA rulebook stuffed into my mailbox, along with a floral-scented note that read, "Looking forward to your compliance." A bit presumptuous, sure, but I shrugged it off. I wasn't the type to pick unnecessary battles. I kept my lawn trimmed to a reasonable length, painted my house in neutral colors, and didn't cause trouble. As far as I was concerned, I was the ideal neighbor, quiet, responsible, and not looking to stir up drama. Then spring came, and I decided to start a personal project, one that would eventually land me in the biggest fight of my life. My plan was simple: enhance my backyard while respecting its history. I envisioned a small stone patio surrounding the foundation, with native plants and subtle lighting to accentuate the site's significance. I secured every necessary permit, obtained official approval from the Massachusetts Historical Society, and even won a small grant to help fund the preservation work. It was a dream project, blending my professional passion for architectural history with my own home. I was excited. I was prepared. I thought everything was set in stone, both figuratively and literally. I was wrong. The first warm Saturday of spring, I stepped into my backyard, measuring tape in hand, ready to mark the layout for my preservation project. The sun was shining, the air smelled of fresh-cut grass, and for the first time in months, I felt a genuine sense of excitement. I had done everything right, secured my permits, consulted with preservation experts, and followed every legal requirement to ensure my project was in full compliance. I was about to turn a forgotten piece of history into something beautiful. I had barely unrolled my blueprint when I heard the sound of approaching heels clicking against pavement. A shadow crossed my lawn, and before I even turned around, I knew exactly who it was. Victoria Holloway stood at the edge of my property, clipboard in hand, oversized sunglasses perched on her immaculately styled blonde bob. Her expression was unreadable, but the slight tilt of her head suggested thinly veiled disapproval. I barely had time to say good morning before she spoke. "What exactly do you think you're doing?" I sighed, already sensing where this was going. "Enhancing the backyard," I said, keeping my voice light. "I have the permits and full approval from the Massachusetts Historical Society. I'm installing a small patio around the foundation and adding some lighting to highlight the historical significance of the site." Victoria's smile was thin, almost performative, as she flipped through the papers on her clipboard. She didn't even glance at the documents I was holding. Instead, she tapped a manicured nail against the stack in her hands. "You didn't get HOA approval." All exterior modifications require board review. I had anticipated this argument. Actually, I said, keeping my tone professional, the HOA bylaws have a specific exemption for historical preservation projects. Section 12.3. The rule applies to any property with an official historical designation, which mine has. Her lips pressed together. That exemption was meant for the Victorian homes on Maple Street, not whatever this is. She gestured vaguely toward the subtle rise in my backyard where the foundation lay, as if it were some trivial pile of stones instead of a pre-Revolutionary War structure. I didn't take the bait. Nevertheless, it applies to any designated historical site, I said, pointing toward the bronze plaque partially hidden by the spring grass. The foundation dates back to 1742. The Historical Society recognizes it as one of the earliest communal gathering sites in this region. Victoria's smile tightened. She wasn't interested in history. She was interested in control, ***. Well, that's for the board to determine, she said smoothly. Until then, I'm issuing a cease and desist. No work is to be done until we've had a formal review. She handed me an official-looking document from her clipboard, the HOA logo stamped across the top. I accepted it with a nod. When's the next meeting? I asked. She barely concealed her smirk. ***, 3 weeks from Thursday, ***. I exhaled through my nose. She was deliberately stalling, stretching the process out as long as possible. She knew exactly what she was doing. I followed the proper channels, attended the next HOA meeting, and presented my case with visual aids, historical documentation, and letters of support from the Massachusetts Historical Commission. The other board members seemed impressed and generally supportive, but Victoria found a way to delay the vote. We need to conduct an impact study, she announced, as if the idea had only just occurred to her. We need to consider potential effects on drainage patterns, nighttime lighting disturbances, and the possibility of unwanted historical tourism. I clenched my jaw but kept my tone measured. It's a private backyard. It's not visible from the street. And as for the lighting, it's discreet and downward facing. I've provided the specs. Victoria wasn't listening. She had already moved on. ***, motion to table the vote until next month, ***. Just like that, she kicked my project down the road for another month. Then another. And another. Each meeting brought a new excuse. First, the board needed clarification on the historical exemption clause. The next month, there was concern about potential foundation shifts due to weather erosion. Then it was the HOA's right to regulate changes to backyards affecting community aesthetics. She manufactured roadblock after roadblock, stalling until I either gave up or ran out of time. Meanwhile, my historical grant was on the line. If I didn't begin work by August, I'd lose the funding entirely. I tried reasoning with Victoria privately, even inviting her over for coffee, hoping to appeal to her supposed passion for preservation. I told her about the site's significance, how it was one of the last 3 remaining structures from the original township. She took a single polite sip of her coffee before setting it down and saying, "Ethan, I understand you're enthusiastic about old rocks, but this is a neighborhood. We have standards." She gave me a thin, patronizing smile before adding, ***, today's backyard project is tomorrow's neighborhood eyesore, ***. That was when I realized, ***, this wasn't about history, legality, or even HOA rules, ***, it was about her personal control over what the neighborhood should look like. The final straw came when I received a notice of violation accusing me of having an unsightly archaeological dig site in my backyard. The document demanded I restore the yard to its original condition within 14 days, or face daily fines. I hadn't even begun construction yet. All I had done was remove some weeds and mark the space. I called an emergency meeting with the Historical Society, who advised me to document everything and prepare for legal action, but by then, the damage was already done. I didn't know it yet, but Victoria was about to cross a line she could never walk back from. I barely had time to process the absurdity of the violation notice before the next wave of harassment began. Over the following weeks, I started receiving one HOA citation after another, each one more ridiculous than the last. First, a fine for excessive weeds, despite the fact that I had pulled every last one around the historical plaque just weeks prior. Then a notice for unauthorized lawn decor, referring to a single stone garden gnome that my neighbor Greg Sullivan had given me as a housewarming gift 3 years ago. The most absurd? A demand to repaint my house because the color, chosen by the previous owner decades ago, was allegedly not within the approved HOA palette. At first, I thought it had to be a mistake. I reached out to my neighbors, wondering if this was part of some HOA-wide crackdown. But no one else had received a single violation notice. Not the house next door, where the lawn was patchier than mine. Not the house across the street, whose backyard was cluttered with rusting patio furniture. Not even the guy 3 doors down who still had his Christmas decorations up in May. Victoria was targeting me. At the next HOA meeting, I walked in with a folder of evidence, time-stamped photos proving my lawn was within HOA limits, documentation confirming my house color had been unchanged for years, and a copy of the bylaws clearly outlining the historical preservation exemption. I waited patiently for my turn, only for Victoria to glide right past my raised hand, pretending not to notice me. The meeting dragged on for over an hour, discussions about shrubbery height, mailbox uniformity, and whether the HOA should purchase a new sign for the community entrance. By the time Victoria finally acknowledged me, we were minutes away from adjournment. I laid out my case, citing my permits, my approvals, the Historical Society's support, and the HOA's own bylaws. I even brought up the string of violations I had received, emphasizing how I was being unfairly targeted. Victoria folded her hands in front of her, that same thin-lipped smirk barely concealed. "Ethan, I understand that you're passionate about your little project, but we must consider the neighborhood as a whole." She exhaled dramatically, as if this entire conversation was exhausting for her. "Besides, we've already received complaints." I blinked. "From who?" She tapped her manicured nails against her clipboard. "HOA complaints are confidential." That was it. That was her whole argument, ***, a vague claim about confidential complaints that conveniently justified every roadblock she had thrown in my way. I went straight to my 5 closest neighbors the next day, asking if they had filed any complaints against my project. Every single one of them looked genuinely confused. Not only had they not complained, but several had even been looking forward to the restoration work. 2 of them even offered to help if I got approval. So Victoria had lied. Of course she had. I was furious, but I still believed that if I followed the right channels, I could beat her at her own game. That was until I discovered what she had been planning behind my back all along. One afternoon, I heard a knock at my door. A man in a neatly pressed suit stood outside, holding a clipboard of his own. "Good afternoon, sir," he said, flashing a polished, professional smile. "I'm with Harrington Realty. I wanted to discuss the HOA's proposed community enhancement plan and how it may affect your property." I frowned. "Community enhancement plan?" He nodded, flipping a brochure open to a carefully designed rendering of Oak Estates. "Yes, the HOA has identified areas for improvement, including a neighborhood green space." I scanned the map, and my backyard was labeled as proposed community parkland. A chill ran down my spine. "There must be a mistake," I said, my voice tight. "That's private property." The man hesitated, clearly sensing something was off. "The HOA informed us that this space was under review for potential community use." It hit me then, ***, Victoria had no intention of ever approving my historical project, ***, she had spent months delaying and obstructing because she had a different plan entirely. She was trying to take my land. I shut the door without another word and immediately started making calls. I reached out to the Historical Society, the town planning office, even a property rights attorney. What I learned made my blood boil. The HOA had no legal authority to claim my backyard, but that hadn't stopped Victoria from trying. The green space proposal was not officially submitted yet, but if she had managed to get enough backing from the board and the community, she could have pushed for an eminent domain-style takeover, citing community benefit. She had planned this all along. I knew I had to act fast. Before she made her next move, I had to make mine. By the time I had gathered all the necessary evidence and prepared to fight back, it was already too late. Victoria had made her move. It was a scorching Tuesday afternoon when I pulled into my driveway, exhausted from a long day at work. I barely had time to process the scene in front of me before I was already sprinting across my lawn, my heart pounding in my chest. A backhoe was in my backyard. The machine's rust-colored claw was digging deep into the ground, tearing through centuries-old stone as if it were nothing but debris. The pre-revolutionary foundation, the one I had fought so hard to preserve, was being ripped apart, the carefully stacked stones haphazardly tossed into a pile of rubble, and there, standing in the center of it all, clipboard in hand, sunglasses perfectly perched on her nose, was Victoria Holloway. She turned when she saw me, lifting her chin in that same condescending way she always did when she thought she had won. "Ethan," she said, her voice laced with mock surprise. "You're home early." I didn't even register the comment. My focus was on the destruction in front of me. My backyard looked like a construction site, no, a war zone. The plaque marking the site's historical significance had been ripped out of the ground, tossed carelessly against the fence. The grass and soil had been completely uprooted, exposing jagged stone that had remained undisturbed for nearly 3 centuries. "What the hell are you doing?" My voice came out sharper than I intended, but I didn't care. Victoria tilted her head, feigning confusion. "Oh, didn't you see the notice? The HOA held an emergency session to remedy your ongoing violation. We're simply restoring this space to a more acceptable condition." Acceptable? I took another step forward, gesturing at the gaping hole where the foundation had once been. "You're bulldozing a historical landmark." She didn't even flinch. "Actually, we're removing a neighborhood eyesore." I turned to the backhoe operator, a man who looked increasingly uncomfortable. "Stop," I said, raising my hands. "You're destroying protected property. This foundation dates back to 1742. The operator hesitated, glancing between me and Victoria. That hesitation was all she needed. "Continue," she said, her voice cold and authoritative. "We have authorization from the board." I pulled out my phone and started dialing. "Then I hope you have authorization for a lawsuit because you're about to get one." Within minutes, the police arrived. Officer Mitch Carter, who I had spoken to before about Victoria's harassment, stepped out of his squad car and took one look at the scene before letting out a slow exhale. "What's going on here?" Victoria immediately launched into a prepared speech about community standards, property values, and the HOA's right to enforce compliance. She spoke over me every time I tried to interject, waving her perfectly manicured hand as if I were nothing but an inconvenience. But Carter wasn't buying it. "Ma'am," he interrupted, his tone firm. "Regardless of HOA rules, this appears to be destruction of private property without the owner's consent. Did you have a court order to enter and modify Mr. Whitmore's property?" Victoria's mouth opened, then snapped shut. "The HOA doesn't need a court order," she said stiffly. "Our agreement gives us right of access to remedy violations." Carter gave her a long, unimpressed look. "That's not how property law works." As if on cue, another car pulled up, this one belonging to Dr. Lydia Harrington from the Historical Society. She stepped out in a hurry, taking one look at the pile of displaced foundation stones before bringing a hand to her mouth. "Oh my God," she breathed. "What have you done?" Victoria crossed her arms, clearly irritated. "We were simply clearing an unsightly space." Dr. Harrington's expression hardened. These unsightly rocks are part of a documented 18th century structure, one of only a handful left in this state. You just destroyed a Category 2 protected site. Before Victoria could respond, a third vehicle pulled up, a news van. Someone from the Historical Society must have tipped off the media, because within minutes, a reporter and photographer were capturing the scene, taking pictures of Victoria standing right in front of the destruction. Victoria tried to walk away, but the reporter followed her, microphone extended. "Mrs. Holloway, do you have any comment on accusations that you authorized the destruction of a protected historical site?" Victoria let out a short, breathy laugh, the kind that masked pure panic. "This is being completely blown out of proportion," she said smoothly, straightening her sunglasses. "We were simply maintaining neighborhood standards. It was just some old rocks." "Some old rocks?" Dr. Harrington repeated in disbelief. "You just bulldozed a pre-revolutionary structure. There are state and federal laws protecting sites like this." The reporter scribbled furiously in his notepad. The photographer snapped a picture of Victoria, still clutching her clipboard, standing amidst the wreckage. That image, the HOA president standing proudly over the ruins of a historical site, would be all over the local news by morning. Victoria had no idea how badly she had just screwed herself. By the next morning, Victoria Holloway's name was plastered all over the front page of the local paper with the headline, "HOA President Bulldozes Historical Landmark in Landscaping Dispute." The photos were even worse, images of her standing beside the wreckage, clipboard still in hand, looking every bit like a dictator surveying her latest conquest. The backlash was swift and brutal. Local historians condemned her actions, preservation groups demanded accountability, and state officials opened an investigation into whether she had violated historical protection laws. The destruction of a Category 2 protected site wasn't just a violation of local ordinances, it had the potential to bring criminal charges. The HOA board, previously content to let Victoria run things unchecked, suddenly wanted nothing to do with her. 3 members resigned within days, claiming they had never approved the so-called emergency session she cited to justify the demolition. And when asked to provide official board meeting minutes proving otherwise, she couldn't. But the biggest blow came from her employer. As it turned out, Victoria worked as a public relations director for a major real estate company specializing in historical restorations. When news of the scandal reached corporate headquarters, they released a statement emphasizing their commitment to historical preservation, and placed Victoria on indefinite administrative leave. By the end of the month, she was officially terminated. The final nail in her coffin came during a special HOA meeting, where nearly every homeowner in Oak Estates showed up. Victoria arrived wearing oversized sunglasses, looking like someone walking the Green Mile. But no amount of dramatic eyewear could save her. The vice president of the HOA formally announced her resignation, effective immediately. New bylaws were proposed and passed on the spot, ensuring that no future HOA president could unilaterally issue fines or enter a homeowner's property without consent. When the floor opened for public comments, I took a deep breath and stepped forward. "This wasn't just about history," I said, my voice steady. "It wasn't even about property rights. This was about one person believing they could override laws, community values, and common decency because they wanted things their way. I hope this is a turning point, not just for our neighborhood, but for anyone who's ever had to deal with a power-hungry HOA board. We can do better." The applause was thunderous. Even Victoria's own husband clapped before realizing what he was doing and awkwardly lowering his hands. 3 months later, Victoria quietly put her house on the market and left Oak Estates for good. Meanwhile, the Historical Society worked with state archaeologists and university students to carefully restore what remained of the foundation. It would never be the same, but the community came together to ensure the site would never be erased again. As for me, I finished my project, with full HOA approval this time. My backyard now stands as a tribute to the past, a reminder that history is worth fighting for. So, what do you think? Have you ever felt powerless against HOA, or Karen, rules? Share your experiences below, let's see who had it worse.